The Fire Nation was a colonialist power, bent on conquering the Earth Kingdom, water tribes, and wiping out the air nomads. Though we tend to think of the 100-Year War as beginning in 0 BG with the air nomad genocide, it could be seen as truly beginning 37 years earlier, with the establishment of Yu Dao as the Fire Nation's first colony on the western coast of the Earth Kingdom, with the time in between being something more of a Cold War. The Fire Nation would go on to establish many more colonies and taking more land, and the story explores how the Fire Nation diminishes native peoples to better its economy and society, and the comics that come after The Last Airbender ask how they're meant to deal with these colonies in the post-war, post-colonial scenario. Today, we are going to take a look at these 3 fascinating geopolitical questions that The Last Airbender asks, and its unexpected answers. And cheers to the writing and world-building software Campfire for sponsoring this video. Especially, and I do mean this, if you're inventing languages, magic systems, or you're a world-building gamer. Head to the link down below in the description to go get 10 days free. The first question is, what justifies colonialism? The regeneration of the inferior or degenerate races by the superior races is part of the providential order of things for humanity. Countries which, like China, are crying aloud for foreign conquest. Nature has made a race of workers, the Chinese race, who have wonderful manual dexterity and almost no sense of honor. Govern them with justice, levying from them in return for the blessing of such a government, an ample allowance for the conquering race, and they will be satisfied. Can I get a yikes? I don't think I've seen more red flags at a USSR military parade. That was Joseph Ernest Renan, quoted, expert on civilization. Yeah, you can guess. In The Avatar and the Fire Lord, Sozin argues for the expansion of the Fire Nation state on altruistic grounds.
Our nation is enjoying an unprecedented time of peace and wealth. Our people are happy, and we're so fortunate in so many ways. I've been thinking, we should share this prosperity with the rest of the world. In our hands is the most successful empire in history. It's time we expanded it.
Though phrased perhaps in a more child-friendly way, Sozin here offers the same justification that Renan does, that it's an altruistic effort to give others the economic and governmental benefits that your state has experienced by forcibly expanding your rule over them. And Avatar offers an interesting analysis of this justification. Necessarily, these efforts result unambiguously in genocide, cultural oppression, and intellectual degradation, not only of the other nations, but of the Fire Nation itself as well. The Fire Nation sages and intellectuals are repressed if they don't agree with state propaganda, and the history itself is hidden from the population. The air nomads were murdered to protect the colonization effort. Earthbenders are enslaved in service of the Empire's economy, taking them away from local industry and removing vital skills from the native community, decreasing their population's standard of living. It was an incredibly common colonization tactic in our world, in places like India, that they would allow the indigenous people to earn, but then tax it out of them to be used by the Empire. And cultural practices are lost with those who remember them and teach them killed, or communities not having the time and resources to live as they should. After all, nearly all of the waterbenders in the Southern Water Tribe were imprisoned or killed. All of this happened in The Last Airbender, and all of it happened in our world too. The writers unequivocally say that this justification doesn't work. And this is all because there simply isn't the economic or political incentives to altruistically share the wealth like Sozin supposedly wanted. Psst, little secret, he didn't. Especially when there's an imbalance of technology like there is between the Fire Nation and the Earth Kingdom, as there was between the Europeans and basically everyone else. Returning that wealth and workforce to the native people would simply make them more able to rebel, weakening the homeland and threatening retribution. The incentives are always towards repression, fundamentally revealing colonization as an endeavor of the idealistically cruel and blind. The writers then build on this deconstruction of colonial justification by looking at its aftermath in a post-war world. Let's turn to Katara. In the comic North and South, Katara arrives back in the Southern Water Tribe to find it different. It's bigger, more technologically advanced, and it's been socially evolving. The rapid change is the result of the proliferation of Fire Nation technology and the village wanting to re-establish itself after a century of isolation and oppression. This is often the space a colony finds itself in after colonization ends. The question the story asks is, how best do a people re-establish themselves in this new kind of world? Katara believes that the priority of her people in this post-war, post-colonial world should be protecting and revitalizing their heritage, including those parts that may not be as practical or may cost time and money to protect. Her concern is with losing the authentic Southern Water Tribe culture as they develop, calling it now just an imitation of the Northern Water Tribe, with it setting up restaurants with their northern food, architecture designed to look like it's from the Earth Kingdom or the Northerners, instead of the simpler igloos that she was used to. She notices that the children of the Water Tribe are also no longer learning the cultural stories that she was brought up with. The social and economic environment is entirely different. And Katara is right in a sense. In New Zealand, a huge amount of money, time, and effort has gone into protecting and revitalizing the Māori language at the cost of other things, even though other languages are more global. There's also a commentary here on the way we think about Reconstructionism, that is, how we help countries that emerge from war or colonialism. I mean, it's not subtle, but they're literally bringing democracy to the country with oil. So you've just got out of a war, congratulations, and we're going to help get you back on your feet. You'll need democracy, office buildings, bombs, low barriers to international trade. You're now ready to join the rest of us modern first world nations. We look forward to buying your oil at working with you. In Reconstruction efforts, emphasis is often on bringing certain styles of government, particular economic models, and globalization to the country. But even though those efforts to rebuild and revitalize can help, they can also be harmful in different ways. Like Katara says, the worry is turning post-war, post-colonial countries into imitations rather than their own identity. Consider the reconstruction effort in Japan following World War II, where the USA poured a huge amount of resources into the country in an effort to help it recover, but also with the secondary intention of making it a useful global ally, which they did. A similar thing happened in Germany, so it happens in the post-war scenario, but this has also happened in post-colonial countries like Korea and many of the Pacific Islands after World War II ended, as empires relinquished their control. Fundamentally, the way we help can be oppressive too. Alternatively, soccer views this rapid globalization and development as progress. A Northern Water Tribesman points out that they found a massive oil reserve in the South Pole that is, quote, key to finally lifting up the South, and that allowing the Southern Water Tribe to evolve like this will make everyone's lives better. It's even called the Southern Reconstruction effort. No points for subtlety there either. That in the wake of colonization and war, the standard of living and equality on a new world stage for everyone is what matters most, even at the cost of some heritage. After all, cultures still evolve with technology. You can't just hold them back forever. The writers also complicate this question in a scene when a non-bender tells Katara that this is hard for you to understand because you're a bender. The kind of power you possess just hasn't been available to us non-benders until now. To Malik and Sokka, machinery and industrialization gives them equal opportunity in a way Katara didn't consider, because the traditional way of doing things gave her status and influence in society. Much of the culture elevated Katara and other waterbenders. Like the Southern Water Tribe, a lot of decolonized countries emerged with industrial technology in the 20th century. Colonial power and culture was still very linked to industrial power, but it also had the potential to help. What were they to do? That was the struggle. To give a real-world example, the Meiji Restoration began in 1853 when the USA came knocking at the Japanese doors, and to quote Bill Wirtz,
"Open the country. Stop having it be closed."
Japan here realized the very real threat of colonization and mobilized to become an industrial power, reforming their government, their military, and their economy. It was brutal, but it worked. At the same time, there was a sizable noble class of samurai who had previously held a lot of land, wealth, power, and their traditions, and this is the important bit, they were culturally important. There was a lot to do with them and their religion. Much of that heritage throughout the Meiji Restoration was diminished or entirely lost, but it came with substantial economic and social benefits for the lower classes. The most surprising finding is that the rice wages since the Meiji era shot up consistently and significantly. During the Meiji period, the welfare ratio in Tokyo shot above that in Milan. In other words, both with benders and samurai, diminishing their influence and status as a class was almost required for the betterment of those beneath them. This complicates the question of protecting culture. The writers of The Last Airbender by no means say that colonization here is an enlightening force that liberates marginalized groups. They clearly represent it as a malevolent, genocidal force. But it does acknowledge that the cross-cultural, cross-economic merging of groups throughout the colonization period will mean that sometimes a better way of organizing wealth and power in society will emerge for the post-colonial world that doesn't necessarily fit with the indigenous culture. The colonial way of exploiting and subjugating indigenous populations certainly ain't it, Chief, but we have to be more realistic when dealing with post-colonial societies. To take the example of Hong Kong, an old British colony, it inherited the Western emphasis on political self-determination, even though much of its culture remained Cantonese. Even when it was handed back to Chinese ownership, that evolution isn't a bad thing, and it deserves to be protected. But Avatar further complicates this discussion in The Promise, where it explores the post-war world and asks, what should we do with leftover colonies? Now, the answer might seem simple on the face of it. Return the people to where they belong, and The Promise opens with the characters working towards that goal with the Harmony Restoration movement. Basically, it's returning Fire Nation citizens to the Fire Nation and the land to the Earth Kingdom. But they challenge this answer when Zuko learns that Yudao now makes the finest metalwork produced, using both Fire Nation and Earth Kingdom expertise, making it one of the richest cities in the world. It's hard to give an exact parallel to the Yudao colonization experience, but Hong Kong was a British colony forcibly ceded in 1842 through to 1997. But it's incredibly rich, with a much higher standard of living than nearly all of its surrounding country counterparts. This is partly because it operated as an open economy and was used as a hub for Western trade in the East, due to its status as a British colony. However, The Promise then makes the point that even in cities like Yudao, that economic prosperity isn't necessarily evenly distributed. The native people are often putting in just as much work but reaping far fewer benefits, to which Zuko says, it's not perfect, but all of the city's people, including the Earth Kingdom people, are now better off than they were 100 years ago. That is, forcing a significant part of the population to leave would, in this case, lower the standard of living for all. There's an economic argument here, and I want to be clear, none of this makes the forced and brutal takeover of Yudao, or in our world Hong Kong, any more justified, but it makes the question of what we do afterwards a lot harder, that returning things to the way they were before may not be the best option economically for either group after so long. The answer just isn't as simple as removing all colonist influence. The writers then complicate the discussion even more with a social and ethical question. Who does the land belong to? It's easy to think of land as belonging to state entities, the Fire Nation, the Earth Kingdom, China, or Britain. This is a communal way of looking at land ownership. But Avatar offers an individualist way of looking at land and resource ownership. Zuko points out that it'd be disrespectful to take them from a life that they spent generations building, their home. I won't let you do it. Because the truth is that though state entities order colonization, it's individuals who live and work in these colonies. Udao is like most real-world colonies in that the people who live there and have links to colonial power, like me in New Zealand, did not choose to be here. We didn't participate in the atrocities of the past, nor did our parents, and the life we have built here is entirely our own. The ethical problem here being that it would punish individuals for something they had no control over, the state's action from an age past. In any just system, that wouldn't be okay. They then build on this. I may be an earthbender, but through my father's bloodline I am a Fire Nation citizen. My father taught me to always be loyal to the Fire Nation, to my people. In the 100+ years of colonization, a new culture has emerged. It has evolved in a way that is neither Holy Earth Kingdom nor Holy Fire Nation. There are hints of this in the series as well. What the story doesn't do here is really interrogate whether that new culture is as legitimate as the two that came before, nor does it really interrogate how that came to be and how much was brutally taken to get it to this point, which is a fair question to ask. But some evolutions are legitimate and worth protecting. Consider those democratic influences that we see in Hong Kong. But the writers then posit that our focus in decolonization should be on the individual responsibility for unequal social conditions in society that they allowed to happen and can change. Earthbenders were still a disadvantaged class, like many indigenous groups have been historically or are still today. Hence why the solution is not forcing citizens to leave, but creating a multicultural council to rule with equal Earth Kingdom and Fire Nation representatives. Now, you may actually disagree with this analysis in any number of ways. You may believe in the way of communal ownership, and that's okay, or you may believe in the overall good of collective responsibility more than individual responsibility. This is just these writers' take on it. Oddly enough, Avatar is actually giving a federalist answer here. Let me explain. The US Senate represents each state equally, with 2 senators regardless of the population. The 2 different cultural groups within Udao also have equal representation regardless of population. New Zealand does also sort of have this, with 4 seats in Parliament reserved for the indigenous Māori. The point being to represent the cultural groups equally, which is somewhat at odds with their otherwise individualist approach, but it acknowledges that you can kind of have a mix of communal and individualist responsibility and fault. 3 fascinating answers to 3 fascinating questions, but what I want to know is what your thoughts are. Let me know down in the comments below. And once again, cheers guys at Campfire for sponsoring this video, and I want to do a bit of a review because the program is for writing and world building, which I know a bit more about, and I want to be more careful when recommending. Though to start, I do want to say that I wholly recommend Campfire Pro and the World Building Pack for certain writers, especially if you're world building languages, magic systems, species, or building your character profiles. And if that is all you want to know, my opinion, then go get the 10-day free trial at this link down in the description below. But otherwise, let me persuade you as to why you should do that. In my first review in the Mentors video, I said that it wasn't so much for world builders, but Campfire has certainly revamped and expanded since then in fantastic ways, in just the ways they needed. They gave me the new World Builders pack, which gives you pages for species, cultures, religions, philosophies, magic systems, and items. There are some basic details for you to fill in on all of these pages, but you can add whatever features as you like. The magic systems page, though, in particular, has clearly had a lot of effort put into it, and for the better. Clearly following Sanderson's rules, it's got areas for costs, limitations, exceptions, the source, how you channel it, as well as a history and guidebook to all of it, all of which are a really good way to structure it, and I know a lot of world builders focus on this kind of stuff. The language page is also incredibly well done. I really want to highlight it for you conlangers out there. It's got pages for phonetics, vocab, grammar, pragmatics, and a visual dictionary. It is clearly designed for you the way that most of these kind of programs just aren't. The timeline continues to be a great way of either laying out your world history or the plot plot of your story with dividers that can be, say, major world-changing events, or as I've used them, divisions for acts 1, 2, and 3. You can do both, have multiple timelines. Now, on a whole, I would say that there are kind of three groups who use these kinds of software. Writers who like to organize and catalog their stories, in-depth world builders, and role players like dungeon masters. The good thing is that Campfire is definitely aimed at world builders as well now, but I think it's got an edge towards role players, D&D players, dungeon masters with a world building mind. For example, the items and species page both clearly have the layout and interface designed for giving stats and attributes even with numerical values, which is a great choice on their part. However, because it also has in-depth character profiles, a whole section for developing character arcs, relationship webs, useful for things like noble houses, Campfire is definitely designed for writers as well, someone more like me, which some world-building softwares I know aren't so much. They can be a bit clunky if you're really just into the writing side of things. I personally struggle with keeping track of details like hair color and glasses and so on, so the character profile stuff really works for me. Though it'll still be really helpful if you're not one of these, you'll definitely get the most out of it if you are one of these two types of writers, I think. There are some things I think the map interface could do a little bit better. It allows you to create articles for locations, but you also have an encyclopedia. And I think it'd be clearer and simpler if clicking on a location brought up that encyclopedia article, rather than having two different library of sorts. There are also some tweaks I'd like to see made to the character arc feature that allow you to create start points and endpoints without events being placed on your timeline. But overall, I wholly recommend Campfire Pro and the World Building Pack to role players, world builders, gamers, and writers, especially in fantasy and science fiction. There are tons of useful organization tools for those large, unwieldy universes, and I think it really helps to kind of know certain things before you start writing, and it really prompts you with those, so you're not going in blind. Also, top marks for the aesthetics, the font and the theme, all of which you can customize, is beautiful. Even if you're not sure, do go get a 10-day free trial. Do it for me, do it for yourself, and the link's down the description. I don't think you'll regret it. And even if you don't use it right now, I reckon you'll come back and use it someday in the future. So yep, I really like Campfire. I hope this video and this review has been helpful. In the meantime, stay nerdy, and I will see you in the future.